Hello, welcome to the Shepherd Staff 2019 Finance 201 webinar. Today we're going to focus on transactions, checks, and vendors. Hi, my name is Rod Kiles and I am the manager of Concordia Technology Solutions Support. I've been with the company quite a few years now, and I really appreciate the opportunity to serve churches. You can reach me one of two ways. Of course, you can send an email to rod.kiles@cph.org. And if you like, you can give me a call at 314-268-1315. I kindly ask that you mute your phones and or microphones and post any questions you may have into the question window. The question window is located on the right-hand side of your screen in most cases and has a little orange arrow at the upper part of the window to expand and collapse that window. Okay, so let's go ahead and if you have any questions, excuse me. Excuse me. If you have any questions along the way, joining us today is going to be Dan Ray. He's one of our software support technicians. He's been with the company a little while now as well. And you may have actually spoken to him in the past at our 1-800 number, but if you need to reach him, you can send an email to dan.ray@cph.org, and you can give us a call at 314-2, or you can give him a call at 314-268-1332. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over our class overview. So our agenda for today, we're going to start out by going through the overview and discussing the different things that we're going to cover during the session. So with this being Finance 201, we're going to take a deeper look into transactions and how to create transactions and how to enter transactions. So we'll cover that during our discussion. Usually our discussion is broken up by a short 5-minute intermission, and then we resume with the second part of our presentation. Then from there, we'll have a short quiz. The quiz is, no pressure, just answer the questions if you'd like, and we'll review the answers. Then we'll kind of, give a little summary at the end of each one of those questions. So no question, it is a 5-question quiz this time, so we'll answer those toward the end of the session. Then we'll have our question and answer session. So if there's any questions that are left over that are unanswered, feel free to post those questions and we'll answer them. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through our class overview. So we're going to start out by talking about vendors. So whenever you enter a transaction, well, I guess for some transactions, you'll have vendors tied to those transactions. So we'll show you how to enter those into the system. We'll do a quick review of double entry bookkeeping. Then we'll show you how to enter in transactions, show you how to do deposits, checks, and journal entries. Then from there, we'll, whenever we're talking about checks, we'll show check printing at that exact same time. So show you how to print checks, then we'll show you how to copy and create recurrent transactions. So some ways of doing the same task over and over again. We can speed that up for you. Then from there, we're going to go through reports. We talked about the budget worksheet in the last session, so I won't cover that in this session, but we'll go through vendor account summaries. We'll go through the different transaction registers. So there's a deposit register, a check register, and a journal entry register. So we will show that. Then we'll also show the accounts receivable module, which is a neat thing that we've added in recently. Then we'll have our quiz. We'll have our question and answer session, and then we'll, I guess, head on to our other task or head home for the day or whatever's next. So I'm excited. I hope you're excited as well. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get started. So I'm going to switch screens over to Shepherd Staff, and I'm going to turn off the webcam so we can maximize our view and focus in on the presentation for today. So let me do that. So everybody should be able to, that looks good. Everybody should be able to see my Shepherd Staff screen. And I'm going to log in as the system administrator. That'll give me full access to the program. And then click OK. Once I'm logged in, I'm going to go into the finance module. And inside the finance module, this is where I'll do all my financing, I guess you could say. So this is where we'll create our transactions and run our reports and do things like that. So we're going to start off with vendors. So for us to be able to write checks, we'll have to have vendors inside of the system. So I'm going to close the I want to, the church dashboard, and the to-do list. And I'm just going to collapse the tree here for a second. So to add a vendor into the system, we'll go to the little V here at the top. So if I have the option to use one of the toolbar icons, I will do that. If not, you can always go to the menu bar and you can click vendors from there. Both will give you the exact same response. Some of them are a little quicker when you use the toolbar icon though. Okay, so since the system has already been set up, we have some vendors inside of the program. So underneath vendors, these are going to be, I think they fall under two categories. So one is vendors are going to be companies or people that you pay. The other thing is vendors could be underneath the people that you pay, they could be employees, people who work at the church. So sometimes you'll have employees who get paid, sometimes there'll be companies or individuals who own their own businesses. So you have some different scenarios there. So inside of here, there's going to be icons across the bottom, and we're going to click the add icon. And the add icon will bring up the add a vendor option. And to enter, in order to write checks and in order to enter in electronic payments, we're going to show you that as well. You'll need to add vendors, and vendors basically give you the ability to track how much somebody was paid over a course of time. So we're going to say vendor type is, and instead of business, we're going to start out with employee, and we're just going to add in two vendors since we already have a list. But with employee, you can type in the name of the employee. If you put member, then that could be considered a member of your church at that point in time. So you have a couple different options in here. The vendor type gives you the ability to filter based on the type. So types are basically categories, and some of them will allow you to, if you look down here underneath the word fax, some of these options will allow you to link this person with the person that's inside your membership module. So like if you're saying the person's an employee and they're inside your membership module, you can link the person to that person. So we'll select Dave Abbott since he's not used in this scenario in the past. So we'll click select, and then it'll pull in his last name, first name, address, and other information there. So that's like a fast way of linking the two people without having to type in their name. So let's say that Dave is an employee. If there's a customer number, you could fill that in, tax ID, payment terms, cash on delivery. It could be discounts. You can state whether the vendor is active or inactive. Then contact information, you can fill in additional information. If this is an actual business, then you can add in contacts for that business. So if you have a company that comes out and services your air condition, and you know, it's a big company and they have multiple people and the actual name of the company isn't the name of the person who works on your HVAC system, you could fill in their name and then that person would become a contact for your record. So this is just an employee of the church. There's additional tabs across the bottom. Activity is going to show you the transactions underneath ledger and the summary per year underneath summary. Purchase orders gives you the option inside of the finance module to request payment from another organization. And then you can track this process through purchase orders. Now, I'm not going to cover purchase orders in this training, but there's the ability to send out purchase order requests. To the right of purchase orders, there's accounts and settings. And these accounts are going to be what we call preferred accounts. And preferred accounts means that that account will float to the top of the accounts drop list when you're creating transactions. So if you're using a certain vendor like Dave Abbott, then you would be able to select his preferred accounts. You can either add them here or they are automatically added when you use them with that vendor. So there's a couple options there. So accounts and settings, and these are the settings over here on the right-hand side. You can state whether or not this person is a minister of the gospel, and you can also state whether or not they can receive or they should receive a 1099. Now, Shepherd Staff does not generate 1099s, but it can provide the information for 1099s. So with that said, you can check that box, and then when you go to run your vendor account summary reports, you can find people who just are supposed to receive a 1099. Okay, so at this point, we would click OK, and then that would allow us to add the person into the system. So most times you're going to be adding in employees, but you could be adding in businesses, Snow Removal Express. And then they could just be a business, and then you could have a contact and Tim Thompson. And then there could be a phone number for that contact. You can add in that information, 555-5555. And then Tim Thompson would be the contact at Snow Removal Express. Okay, so from there you can click OK. And then he would be under business, and then you can filter by your different types. And then that will allow you to find people quicker here inside the vendors list, but also when you're creating transactions, you can filter by vendor type as well. Okay, so that's how you'll add in vendors. Let's go ahead, and after we've added in our vendors, let's talk about deposits. So we spoke about deposits just a little bit during our prior transaction during our prior session. And when we were talking about deposits, we were explaining, well, if you create a batch inside the contributions module, then that batch, if you post it to finance, will flow into your deposits register. So that's one way of creating a deposit. And it's a popular feature when it comes to Shepherd Staff. Another way that creating a deposit can be done by simply going into the deposit register and just adding a deposit into the system. So let's walk through that process. So we got to have money before we can spend money. So we're going to enter in a deposit before we go through our checks and journal entries. So to enter a deposit, I would use the letter D icon here at the top. That will open up our deposit register. There we go. Then inside the, I guess the footer or the lower part of the window, you'll see how it says bank account. Whichever bank account we select, that's going to be the account that is used when we create a transaction. So when we click add, it's going to add a deposit for Central Trust checking. So one other thing I'd like to discuss before we actually add that deposit into the system is over here on the right, there's a status drop-down box. That status represents the status of the transactions that we're going to see inside of this grid. They also kind of clue you into the different types of statuses that a transaction can have. We're talking about deposits right now. So a deposit can have a blank status, a cleared status, or a voided status. So blank means that there's no status at all. That does represent the status that a transaction will have when you are creating a deposit. So it's been entered into the system, it's actually showing on your reports, but it has not cleared the bank yet. So when you run your bank account reconciliation, you're actually going to be clearing your deposits at that point in time. And really running the bank account reconciliation is all about marking transactions as cleared, and you are comparing what cleared the bank versus what is entered into Shepherd Staff, and they should match one for one. And we'll show you how to do a bank account reconciliation tomorrow morning when we go through that training. But the whole process comes down to, when talking about bank account reconciliations, the whole process comes down to matching the two together. So, and we'll talk more to that. Okay, so cleared, and then the last status here is void. And if you void a transaction, it'll show up in here underneath voided. So those are the three types of statuses that a deposit can have. There are some other options here. You can say all, and you can say all except void. But in most cases, you'll just have it set to all, and then you'll be down here at the bottom and you'll be able to see your transactions. Okay, so we're seeing the last 12 months only, and we're going to add in a deposit. So we're going to click add. Deposit number, it will automatically increment transaction after transaction. So we're on our 483rd deposit. Since we're adding it from this window, it is it's going to enter in today's date. So June 18th, 2019. Then from there, you'll have the status, which is going to be blank. And then you'll be able to fill in a memo. So I'm going to say for this memo, I'm going to say Sunday offerings. And then I'm actually going to change this date back to Monday. So, hey, we received the offerings on Sunday, locked up the deposit in the safe. Then the person came in on Monday, took the deposit out of the safe, took it down to the bank, and the bank's going to enter the deposit on the 17th. So I just had another thought cross my mind. Okay, let me make a quick note here. Okay, so there we go. So Sunday offerings, then from there, we'll be able to go through, and we don't have to select the bank account because the bank account was selected before then. So whenever we created this transaction, we would have selected the bank account. Then at that point in time, we would then go through and select the accounts that we want to use. So I have a list of accounts I want to use. I'm going to start out with actually the general fund. Then from there, after the general fund, I'm going to select the mission fund. There we go. And then after the mission fund, I'm going to select the youth fund. There we go. And then after the youth fund, I'm going to select the building fund. So those are the four funds that people contributed to last Sunday. You can fill in line item descriptions. They're extremely helpful. Like lots of times it's really like leaving a note about that account on this deposit. So like you can say, hey, these were Sunday offerings for this date, but there might be other memorial information or different little descriptions that you want to add into the system. From there, we'll fill in the general fund amount, $5,000, then the mission fund, $1,000, then the youth fund, $1,000, $500, and then the building fund, $300. Then if you're manually adding in deposits, when it comes to manually adding in deposits, what you'll do is you'll want to verify that this matches what was entered in for your offering records in the contributions module. So when we get all the way to the end, then there should be $6,800, and that should match the total amount of our deposit. Then at that point, we can just click on OK, and it will add the deposit into the system, and then that deposit will show on all of our reports. So the first area that I like to show is our account ledger. So I'm going to click on Central Trust Checking here. That'll bring up our account ledger. Then we'll be able to see our $6,800 down here at the bottom. And this is going to be a running balance from the start of the year all the way to now. So you'll be able to see all those different deposits. You'll notice how deposits from batches will say deposit from batch. So instantly I know that, hey, this is a system that people are posting offering batches from the contributions module. And that's also why I've enabled this something a little bit different. But you'll be able to go in and review that information. You can double click on the row and it'll open up the a view of the deposit, and you can take a look at it. You can't edit from this view. If you need to edit the deposit, you will have to go back into the deposit register and then double click edit and modify the deposit. But you can make changes when it comes to a deposit up to the point that you reconcile that deposit. So this would be the approach that you would use for just entering a deposit into the system. Now, there are times where people will use the contributions module to enter the offering deposits into the system, and then they'll just go in and enter any other deposits in. So say we're doing the rental property and people are paying, and you have to take that deposit down to the bank. You could do that with this as well. So you can use both of them together. They don't have to be separate or anything like that. Okay, so we're going to click OK, and then we are going to click close. So we've entered in our deposit. We were able to review it and everything looks good. Thumbs up. We can move forward at this point in time. So after deposits, we have money in the bank. We are going to spend some of that money now. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a few checks. So let's go ahead and to create our checks, let's see, 1, 2, I've got a couple check examples here that I want to show. And let me add this in. If there's any kind of transaction that you would like me to create, I haven't gotten to journal entries yet, but there may be a special scenario that you'd like me to demonstrate during the webinar today. You can let me know. You can post that in the question box and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so for checks, very similar process. I'm going to click close and I'm going to go to C for checks. And underneath the check register, you'll actually see all of your checks. And you're really seeing the checks for the bank account that you have selected. So once again, just like deposits, when you go to enter in your transactions, you want to make sure you have the correct checking account. And then once you're inside this view, you'll see all of the transactions, typically for the last 12 months, but you could uncheck that box and you would see more transactions, actually all the transactions for all times. Like down here at the lower right, it's 3187. So 3,187 checks have been written out of this system. But from there, we'll check that back, and the statuses are a little bit different for checks than deposits. So with deposits, you're not going to have things like hold, pending, stopped, either you deposited the money or you didn't. But with checks, there's, I guess, kind of like in between, like limbo state type things that happen. So with that said, cleared is going to be the same. Cleared means that you entered the transaction into the system, it cleared the bank, and then you ran the bank account reconciliation onto the check. So it's marked as cleared. It can no longer be modified once it's been cleared. So that's a cleared transaction. And actually, if you double click on a cleared transaction and open it, it'll look like this, and this back area will be green, and green does not mean go in this situation. Green is like, hey, you can't make any changes. So that's a cleared transaction. There is hold, and basically if you put a check on hold, it's kind of like holding the check until you get paid or something like that. So you can enter a check, put it on hold, and then come back and modify the check and put it on paid after that. So paid is going to be the fact that you wrote the check handwritten, so you wrote the check out, or paid can mean that you printed the check from the system. So paid means that it's being given to the person who's going to cash that check and receive the funds from that check. Pending is a kind of like a limbo state as well. So with pending, you can enter the check into the system, and before you print the check, it'll be in a pending status. When you print the check, it'll take that pending check and switch it over to a paid check at that point in time. So pending is once you've entered the check and you're just waiting to print the check. Below that, there's two that are very similar. There's stopped and there's void. So I'm actually going to talk about void first. So when you void a check, it basically gets, well, I can't say it gets rid of the check. When you void a check, you've entered a check into the system and you void it, it just zeroes the check out. So it's there, you can see that it was entered in, but it's zeroing out all the dollar amounts. So it's kind of like you write a check and you void it, you know, like it never reaches its destination. You made a mistake on the check and you're kind of, hey, I need to rewrite this check, so I marked it as void, so it zeroes it out. Now, stopped is going to be when you write a check, somebody receives it, they lose the check, then they call you and they're like, hey, guess what? You know that check, lost it. Can you stop that check and write me another one? You're like, sure. So you go in here, you stop it, contact the bank, you stop it. Then inside here, when you stop the check is in the system, but it's creating a reverse and journal entry to reverse the balances. And it's actually reversing on the date that you stop the check. So when it comes to void, you can only void within the current fiscal or finance year. When you stop a check, you can stop a check at any point in time. So if you wrote the check November of 2018 and you get to January of 2019 and they're like, hey, we avoid it, and you'll be like, no, I have to stop it. So you'll stop it and then issue another check at that point in time. So there are some nuances to the statuses with checks because checks have different nuances. People are moving away from checks in some cases, but churches are still printing a lot of checks, but people are moving toward electronic payments more and more because they're, you know, kind of easier to deal with than with checks. So, okay, so we're going to leave this on all, and we're going to add in a check. So we're going to add in a couple checks. The first check is we are going to go through and use our, let's use our business for removing snow. And we are June, July, but we're going to use Snow Removal Express. So we're somewhere where there's a lot of snow. So then at that point, if this is going to be a handwritten check, then you can go in here and switch pending to paid. Then at that point in time, you can fill in a memo, urgent. How about just needed snow removed? So then at that point, this is our bank account at the top. This is our current balance. This is how many we have pending or held, and this is our available balance. So then at that point, you could go through, and I believe we have a snow removal account here. Let's see. There we go. So then you can put in the amount. I don't know how much it is to get snow removed, say $100. There's an invoice number, you could fill that in, then you can click OK, and then it will create that transaction. It'll instantly mark it as paid. You'll notice it is not computer written, so that column is empty, but it's in the system and it's ready to be reconciled whenever Snow Removal Express cashes that check. So that's just entering in a handwritten check. If you want to enter in a check that you're going to print, instead of changing the status from pending to paid, you would actually just leave it on pending. So let's say that we're going to pay the electric bill. So we have a company in our area, Ameren, so we'll say Ameren. You can say get the last check. So it'll review the system of the checks. It'll review through the system to look at those checks, and then it will fill in that information. So $208, this is June, say it's now $258 or something like that. $258.31. So then at that point, if you needed to fill in any other additional information, you can, then you'll click OK. And then it'll fill in that pending transaction. So it still isn't computer written. We're going to show you how to print checks here in just a moment, but you're just basically going through the process of entering in your checks prior to printing your checks. So at this point, let's add in one more check. And this one, I want to be a representation of a payroll check. So to enter in a payroll check, first you'll select the person that you want to pay. So we're going to take Derek Woods here. This is going to be pending because we're going to print this check out, and this is the month of June. So June salary for Mr. Woods. Then from there, you have the choice to go through line by line and select your accounts, or you can use the accounts button down here at the bottom. So with this, we're going to go through and we're going to, we're sorted. How are we sorted? We are sorted alphabetically within the account types here. So you can sort by number, or you can sort like a form of alphabetical. So we're going to select our staff account, staff salary. So that's one account. Then we're going to select federal income tax, state income tax, Social Security and Medicare. Social Security. There we go. So we've selected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 accounts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 accounts. Then you click OK and it'll add in all of those accounts for you. Then at that point in time, you'll go through and fill in your dollar amounts. Now, if it's a liability account, the way that it works is you'll reverse the credits and debits by typing in negative. So I guess technically there's really no negatives in financing, but with this, they use a negative to take that amount off of the transaction. So minus 9510 for federal income tax. Medicare, we're going to use minus 1208. With Social Security, we are going to use minus 5167. With state income tax, we are going to use minus 22. And then we're going to put the total amount of the check, the gross, 83333. So this is going to be the net, the amount that he takes home, $652.48. And then the rest is going to go into a liability account. So the amounts that the individuals pay are going to go into liabilities, and basically the church will hold that money until they pay it out to the government. If the church has to pay something, then it would be an expense account like the staff salary here. Okay, so at this point in time, we'll click OK. And then that will enter in another pending transaction. So now we have 2 pending transactions. And with those 2 pending transactions, we are now ready to print checks. So I'm going to close the check register here. And to print checks, we can use the check print icon here, print checks icon. Or we can go to transactions, checks, and then go to print. And both of these will give you the option to print checks from Shepherd staff. So in looking at this, this is our bank account, and you can switch over to different bank accounts. You'll just want to select the bank account that has the checks that you want to print. From there, it'll remember your last check number and increment that for your first check number. Then you can state the date that you want to write the checks on. You can print the total amount in words. You can hide the heading on the top stub. So that's for a certain type of check that you have to do that. You can say do not print the memo line. That's also for a certain type of check. So when you print onto a check blank, there could be information on there that you don't want to print over the top of. And that's what these 2 options are all about. So making sure you don't print on top of something else that's already set up and predefined by that check blank. Okay, so boldface name and address, include the words dollars and cents. If you're from Canada, you can use the CPA check format here, and you can show calendar, show the calendar year-to-date total. So like when you're printing the check for Derek Woods, you may want to see the total amount that he's received year-to-date. Okay, so then you can adjust top to bottom, left to right. You can print out a test check to make sure that everything lines up the way that it should. You can use margin adjustment or default, and that allows you to basically slide the check up and down the page, kind of like almost an inch. So depending on your printer, you may have to select a certain layout. So most of the HP printers use margin adjustment, so I usually stay on that one. From there, you will either print a pending check report. So this helps you determine the check number that's going to get assigned to the check in the order that your checks are going to print. So that's what that report allows you to do. Then from there, you can say, hey, I want to preview and print my checks. So that'll bring up this preview window where you can scroll through and take a look at your checks. You can also scroll over to the second check. You can zoom in or zoom out. And then once it looks, and actually you have to zoom out. Once it looks correct, if it looks correct, click print. If it doesn't, click close and go make corrections. Then we're going to say print these checks, and it's going to send those out to the printer. So you'll go then at that point and retrieve the checks from the printer. So if everything works correctly, you remember to put the check blanks into the printer. Nothing jams. I guess you put the paper in the right way and everything. You'll say all my checks printed correctly. If they did not print correctly, you'll be at a Y in the road with what do you want to do at that point in time. You can say none of my checks printed correctly, or I want to cancel, or only some of my checks printed correctly. So if it's some of the checks printed correctly, you'll actually be stating which of those checks printed correctly. So it could be, well, just the Ameren check printed correctly, or just the payroll check printed correctly. So you'll have to make that determination. But let's, and actually when you say only some of my checks printed correctly, that means that the ones that did print, and I'm actually going to say this one printed correctly, Derek Woods. You'll click continue. Do you wish to mark just the selected checks as paid? We'll say yes. Then click OK. And then I'm going to close this and go back into checks. And for our June salary check, you'll see that that one is paid. And for our other check, it's still marked as pending. So you can go back and reprint that check at that point in time. So when a check has been printed, you can still make some changes, like you can change the accounts. You just can't change the amounts at that point in time. So you would need to void the check if you needed to change amounts. So I'm going to click OK here. Then we found out, hey, there was something wrong with the printer. We need to reprint that one check. We'll go back to our print checks icon. Make sure that that check is selected. Then click preview. Look at the check. It looks pretty good. Then print. It'll print that check at this point in time. Then all my checks printed correctly. Then you'll do continue. Do you wish to mark all printed checks as paid? We'll say yes. Then we'll say finished at that point in time. Okay, so all of our checks have now been printed. It shows in our balances. So checks have been printed, computer written here on the right-hand side. Then if we go to Central Trust Checking, we can actually see those checks here in the window and they've been paid. And everything looks correct. Our balances look good. We're good to go on to our next task. So that's good news. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through journal entries. So I want to go back to our PowerPoint slide at this point in time. And I meant to show this earlier, but I think it's still relevant. Checks and deposits, for the most part, make a lot of sense to people. Like, we do those transactions in our own lives all the time. So, you know, everybody receives some type of pay. So there's deposits. We do payments, checks, things like that. So when we've done them in the past, we may not do as many as we used to by far, but those usually typically make sense. Accounting principles, though, that apply to journal entries a whole lot is double entry bookkeeping. The basic principle of the standard accounting system is that there will always be at least 2 accounts on every transaction, and that the debits and credits on a transaction must balance. And this is more evident in journal entries than it is in deposits and checks. A good example though is with deposits. When a deposit is made, money goes not only into an asset checking account, but it also goes into an offset tracking account that shows why the money was given or the reason the money was received. So I do want to show the transaction chart. So this transaction chart, debits and credits chart, is used whenever you're creating journal entries. So lots of times what I do is I'll have this chart out, and I actually keep a copy of it either on my desk or taped to the bottom of my monitor, and it's been there for the last so many years. But you know, ever since I started, they're like, hey, you're going to need this. And it is true. Whenever you're doing journal entries, this debits and credits chart is just needed. You know, it allows you to fully understand what's going on. And like lots of times you'll hear accountants and accounting people say, hey, you're going to credit the account or you're going to debit that account. And this is what they mean when they're talking about that. When they say they're going to credit the asset, they're going to decrease the asset. When they say they're going to debit the asset, they're going to increase the asset. And if you kind of memorize the asset part, you can kind of build out the rest of the chart from there. But it starts with understanding that, one, these don't always work out that way where a debit is an increase and a credit is a decrease, and that they are interlinked. So when you're working with this and you're working with assets versus incomes, a debit is an increase and a credit is an increase on an income. So a debit is an increase on an asset, a credit is an increase on an income account. And you would say that it's very similar for your expenses as well. A credit is a decrease on an asset account, and a debit is an increase on an expense account. So they might go opposite ways, but we're always talking about debits and credits. So let me give you guys just a second to write down the debits and credits chart if you want to. So we'll I'll just look at my watch here. We'll give you 30 seconds there, and here we go. We'll give you 30 seconds there, and I keep it on my desk, and it just helps me whenever I'm understanding transactions or trying to understand transactions. Okay, so that's a little bit over 30 seconds there, but let's go ahead and let's go back to finance. And here inside finance, let's do some journal entries. So I have 4 different journal entries. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got 4 different journal entries that I want to show. And let's start out with bank interest. So when it comes to entering bank interest into the system, lots of times I see people use deposits, but really it's a journal entry. To add in bank interest, we'll go to journal entries. Then we'll click add down at the bottom. Then journal entry number, date, memo. So this is bank interest. June. Then you're going to select both the bank account and the offset account. And the offset account could be bank interest. And I think we just have a 015 account that's interest income. Okay, so in looking at that, we've got the bank account and we've got the income account. So I'm going to switch screens back to our slide here. So to increase the bank account, we're going to do a debit. And to increase the income account, we're going to do a credit. So debit the asset, credit the income. Debit the asset, so say bank interest was 29 cents. We'll do a credit, 29 cents. And you'll notice down here at the bottom that they match at that point. So you can have more than one line, but at the end, all of those lines have to balance out. They have to equal, the credits and debits have to equal. Okay, so then at that point, you'll click OK. It'll create that transaction. You'll be able to go over to your Central Trust checking and see that 29 cents. And that's going to be an increase. So we went from $288,990.29 to $288,998.58. So the balance went up, and that's what we would expect when we earn bank interest on an account. So that's how you can enter in bank interest. The opposite of bank interest is going to be bank fees. So we'll click Add. And this is going to be bank fees. And with bank fees, we're going to select the bank account once again, but we're going to scroll down all the way down close to the bottom and find bank fees. And that was here it goes. Okay, so with bank fees. So in looking at our debits and credits chart, to decrease the bank account is actually a credit, and to increase our expense, that's going to be a debit. So we're going to do a credit and then a debit. So credit, that's going to be our decrease, $7.99. And then debit's going to be our increase for the expense accounts. And the expense accounts are just going to keep going up and up and up and up. So at that point, we'll make sure our credits and debits match. Then we'll click OK. And then I'll just pull this to the side this time. Then that would be a decrease of $7.99. So using the debits and credits chart just kind of gives you a direction and a reminder of how to increase and decrease these different accounts. Okay, so after bank fees, I want to show two other things. So actually one of them, let's actually go through and pay our snow removal company, but instead of using a check, say he has where you can just pay him on your cell phone, So you can enter that in as an EFT. So this EFT is for a vendor. It doesn't have to be a refund, but it could be, tracked as a refund. So then we'll use Snow Removal Express. And this is going to be snow removal in June. Then you go through, and since we've used the accounts in the past, it's going to try to move those to the top. So usually I like to put the bank account first and then put snow removal or the expense accounts or offset accounts below that. So to decrease a bank account is a credit, so $100. And then the increase an expense account is a debit, $100. So from there, you can go through and click outside the box. It'll move the debits down here. But then at that point, you can click OK, and then that transaction will appear here as well. So that's how you can enter in an electronic payment using a journal entry. So when will you want to use that? When you're paying for something and it's literally not a check. Could be an online payment, could be an EFT transfer, could be an ACH, could be a debit card transaction. But anytime you're doing that, then you just want to use a journal entry instead of using a check or a deposit. Okay, the fourth type of transaction is going to be when you transfer money between two bank accounts. So lots of times when people transfer money between bank accounts, they'll open up a journal entry and they'll select Central Trust Checking on the one line, and they'll select Central Trust Checking on the other line, fill in their credits and debits. Then they'll save their transaction, and they'll be done. So the only drawback from doing this is if you have two asset accounts, you may want to reconcile both accounts. A transaction can only be reconciled with a single account. So in cases like this, what I do is I make sure to use a memo, and I'm going to say transfer from checking, and I'm going to do CHK to savings. And then I put 1 to let me know that this is the first of 2 transactions. So, and I'm actually going to copy that description. So instead of selecting the savings account, I'm actually going to use a transfer account. And I usually use an expense account, but it could be any account type, but I like to use an expense account. So this is going to take the money out of the checking account and put it into this transfer account. Then from there, I can either copy the prior transaction and then reverse the credits and debits and change the accounts, or I can just add another one, paste in my memo, and then this could be Central Trust Savings, and this could be our transfer account. So we're going to reverse our credits and debits this time. So this is going to be 5,000 going into Central Trust Savings, and it's going to be taking the 5,000 out of our transfer account. So at this point, we click OK, and we have those 2 transactions. They have the same date and they have the same memo, so that kind of links them together. Close. Then here, we've got 5,000 coming out of our Central Trust checking. If we go to Central Trust Savings, we've got 5,000 going in, we have a debit. And if we go to our transfer account, then we'll notice that the balance on the transfer account is 0, so that money is not held in that account. So if you want to reconcile both your checking and savings account, you'll just want to go through and use this process so that you have a transaction to reconcile with each one of those assets. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's have our short 5-minute intermission, and then we'll resume after that. And when we resume, we will we'll talk about recurrent transactions, and then we'll talk about some of the different reports. Hello everyone, welcome back. Switch back to Shepherd Staff here. And when we left, we finished off showing how to enter in different journal entries. So the next thing to take a look at is ways of speeding up transaction entry. And there's two ways of doing that. So one of them is recurrent transactions, and one of them is simply the copy feature. So I'm going to show the copy feature first. That one, I hear people using that one all the time. So like you go into checks and you have to enter in the same check over and over and over again. An easy way of doing that is clicking on the person's check, clicking copy. Then it will copy all the information. You can make changes if you needed to. Then you can click OK. And then it will put that check into the system. So the copy one is really popular because it's quick to kind of get you started and moving forward. Another option is recurring transactions. So basically recurring transactions give you the option of tying a transaction to a schedule. So we have some older recurring transactions in our system. So like we go to the R with like the little loopback circle on it. That'll bring up our recurring transactions, and you can create recurring transactions. So say I want to get rid of the old recurring transaction for Mr. Woods here. So I'm going to click delete that one, and then say I want to create a new one. So to create a new recurring transaction, there's a couple of choices. So I can go in here, I can click on Derek Woods, and then I can click on the recurring transaction icon. And do you want to make a recurring transaction from the one you have selected? And I'll say yes. Then it'll allow me to put in a schedule. So let's say that the next time that I want to generate it, I'm actually going to go into the past, and I'm going to do the 14th. And then I'm going to say that I'm going to do this every 2 weeks. And then say, let's end it December 27th and click OK. So then when I click OK, it's going to create that transaction, and it's literally going to put it on a schedule. Then this little reminder finger will flash. And actually, I want to show that reminder finger here. So when you go into the finance module, and that little reminder finger appears, you can click there, then that will bring up your yet to be generated recurring transaction. So I'm going to say generate only for the selected transaction. And then you can state whether or not you want to use the module date or if you want to use the next date. So I'm going to use the next date. I'm going to use 6/14. Then at that point in time, I can just generate the transaction. One transaction will be generated. Do you wish to continue? I'm going to say yes. Then click close. It does relaunch the timer on the recurring transaction. But if I go into checks, I now have that check for Derek Woods. So you got to kind of think about it as being scalable. So if you had 10 checks, you could generate all 10 checks with a couple of clicks. So you can kind of speed up the process. Once they're generated, you can edit and modify them if you needed to make changes. But recurring transaction, if you have multiple checks to generate, could save you a ton of time. Okay, so once you've, let me show this as well with recurring transactions. Once you've generated or created a recurring transaction, you can edit it and make changes. And you can even make changes by clicking details to your pattern or to your recurrency. So there's quite a bit of power with recurring transactions. I'm only spent a couple minutes talking about it, but I think churches could really benefit from recurring transactions instead of re-entering the same transaction over and over again. That just costs you time when you can copy it or you can make it recurring. So. Okay, so that's recurring transactions. Let's talk about reports for a few minutes, and then we're going to talk about accounts receivable. So when it comes to reports, let's start with the vendor reports. So to access your reports, let's clean up our desktop and close some of these other windows. But to access the vendor reports, you'll almost always go to reports, and then you'll go to the bottom of the list here to pull up your report. So vendor account summary report. And the vendor account summary report allows you to view in most cases, an annual report, but it could be for a date range of your vendors. So these are going to be people who you as treasurers have paid, and you can state a single year, all calendar years, a date range. And then earlier we were talking about, hey, if it's a 1099, you may just want to include those people, or if it's a minister of the gospel, you just may want to include those people. So I'm going to say anybody who we've paid this year, and then you can filter by vendor type, and then you'll say preview, and it will show those companies, vendors, individuals. They'll show in here, and you'll be able to see the accounts that were used in conjunction with those vendors. So you can then at that point print this report and use it to help you create your 1099s or W-2s or whatever you needed to do at that point in time. Okay, so that is the vendor account summary and W-2 information report. After that report, let's take a look at the vendor directory report. So the vendor directory report allows you to do some of the old school things, but even some things that you may still want to do today. So your format could be a directory or a rotary card. So if you're still using a rotary card system, you can print those cards here. But if it's like a one-sheet directory, you can do that as well. You can specify which vendor types you want. And you can do a range from one vendor to the next vendor. So let's go with all for ours. From there, you can decide what information you want to include. And some of that information may be important for your vendor directory if you're going to have it printed out and sitting on your desk, and you'll flip through it to find people's contact information. And some of it may not, just depending on what you needed on the report. So there's always preview and print, and we're kind of going to change that paradigm going forward in the future. But right now you have preview and print, and then you can preview, and then at that point you can use print down here at the bottom. So we'll go to 150%. Then from there, you'll have your vendor directory, and this would just be a list of the vendors that you wanted to include information about in your vendors report. Okay, after the vendor directory, vendor labels. So at some point, you may have to go through and generate a label for a vendor, so or multiple vendors. So you could say active vendors all. You could filter by your type. You could say the checks that were paid on a certain date. So, hey, we're going to be mailing out checks. We want to print labels. We can tie them together by using this vendor labels report. So let's say we're going to do the checks that we did on June 18th. Contents, address, style, your style of checks. You can include a barcode. You have to print quite a few labels or do a decent size mailing to be able to get a discount to be able to use barcodes, but you may have that option. You can bulk mail format, and then you can have a first page adjustment. So if you skip the first 6 labels, you can skip down to page 6. Then at that point you can preview. And then these are the labels that you would print for the checks that we've printed out recently. So here's an option to print those out, and you can kind of see how it skipped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then this is 7, 8, and 9, and it would print those labels at that point in time. Okay, so let me close the preview for vendor labels. After vendor labels, there's vendor payments and vendors with no activity. So vendor payments is going to be a report that's going to show you detail or 3-year summary for each one of your vendors. So detail is going to show you the detail for your vendors. So that could be it could be checks or it could be journal entries. And let's say we'll do everybody. We'll do a full range. You can include inactive vendors, and you can include vendors with no payments, which kind of digs into vendors with no payments down here. But then you can say current year, and you can do a date range, and you can preview. Now with detail, that's going to give you a chance to see each one of the transactions to that vendor. With summary, you're actually just seeing totals for each one of your vendors. So depending on your goal or the task that is at hand, let me zoom that in, you'll be able to decide which one makes the most sense. So checks, and they've added in journal entries because lots of people are paying people electronically. And then you can see counts, and you can kind of go forward from there. But that's the concept of this vendor payments report. Now, in working with vendors, you may have vendors with no payments, and you want to, go through and mark them as inactive. So you can say no activity since this time period, then preview, and then, hey, these people, actually we just added Dave Abbott, but I guess that's Vietti Marketing. We could mark that vendor as inactive. They haven't had any activity since June 18th of 2014. So over 5 years at this, or exactly 5 years at this point in time. So they may be one you want to go in, mark it as inactive so that they don't show on your drop list, and they kind of shorten your workflow when you're recording and entering in information. Okay, so those are the vendor reports. So let me close that. So after our vendor reports, we've reviewed our vendors, we've seen our payments. Let's look at our transaction registers. So we started out with deposits, so why don't we start there? With deposits, the deposit register and the check register are the same register. And really the only change is the content that's going to show on the report. So if we start with deposits, we can say the fund that we want to use, and we can select the accounts that we want to include. Then we can hide line items if we'd like. Set your date range. If you're just searching for a specific deposit, or you just want to see deposits within a certain, that are referencing a certain account, you can do that as well. So these reports allow you to do research as well. It's just not the fact that you're seeing all of your transactions. You can also use them to research and find information about different transactions. So at this point, we'll click preview. And underneath preview, then we'll be able to, let me zoom in, there we go. You'll be able to see all of your deposits. Now you're seeing the line items here, so that does make the deposit a little bit longer. And if we go all the way to the end, we can see the deposit that we created today. So this is a deposit register. I would say the check register is more popular than the deposit register by far. So I hear people talk about the check register in our phone calls more than I ever hear people talk about the deposit register. Not that the deposit register isn't valuable, but this is the one they want to make sure is right, because this is how they're spending the money. So they want to be able to make sure everything's 100% right with this. So this is a valuable report. You can see your check numbers, dates, the status of the checks, line items. You can see all of that information on this report. And then when you get to the end of the report, you can see your bank account total at the very end. So that is the check register. Both of those registers are basically within the same report. The journal entry register is actually separate from the check and deposit register. Journal entries are a little bit different in the fact that you're actually working with the line items a little bit more than you are with checks and deposits. Kind of the same structure here though, because you have date range, number range, and with this you can do one journal entry. You can also state whether or not you want to include additional information and state that it's just referencing one account. So I've been able to use the referencing this account before with checks, deposits, and journal entries to help customers track down things that are not quite right within the system. So it's very powerful. Okay, then from there with the journal entry register, once we've pulled up the transactions, we'll be able to look at them and see if everything looks the way they should between the credits and debits. And that looks pretty good. That looks really good. Okay, so well, you could print that report if you wanted to, so I'll close that. So those are our different transaction registers. I showed the budget worksheet in the last training session. So why don't we take a look at the budget projection worksheet? And some people use the budget projection worksheet to help them kind of plan out the upcoming year. With this report, you can select whether you want to, percentage change from prior years, or project using a percentage change from prior years, average plus or minus this amount, and a percentage that I apply. So depending on what you're looking at, you may be manually doing these types of calculations using the budget worksheet, or you can use the budget projection worksheet. So we'll zoom in just a little bit. And it will show you each one of your accounts. It'll show the amounts that were brought in for income or spent for expenses, and it'll give you averages and year-to-date changes and give you projections for upcoming years. So it's a powerful report as well. So it just depends on how much you're into numbers and how much research you need to do for the upcoming year. Okay, so I'm going to close the budget projection worksheet report. And that's the last report that I wanted to show. And it looks like I actually closed the finance module. So I'm going to open up the finance module, Alt-Tab. And the last thing that I had to show was accounts receivable. So it's been a few years now, but we added in accounts receivable. And accounts receivable allows you to basically create accounts and keep track of who's paid up on their accounts. So school tuition is a good example. I've talked to people who've set up daycare systems inside of the software, but there's basically, you can send out invoices or send out bills, people can pay them and you can track their payments and kind of keep everything organized. So it's a pretty neat system. So to access accounts receivable, you'll click AR here at the top, the accounts receivable icon. And this is a self-contained system. So everything that takes place with accounts receivable is within this window, within this module. So you'll go in here, and there's a few steps, but it's pretty straightforward. How deep you want to go into creating different items, that can make it a little more complex, but with this, you're going to go through and there's going to be AR accounts. And this drop-down box allows you to go between the different components of the accounts receivable system. But you'll start out with AR accounts and you'll add in an AR account. The way that ours is set up for a school. So we're going to say house and family. We're going to link this to a person that's actually a family, a household that's within our Shepherd staff system. So we're going to select Sally Baxter. Then from there, all of her information will populate. Default terms, point of sale. So she's going to pay for that when it happens. That's the default term. Then we'll click save. Actually, before I click save, we do have person, nonprofit, which is going to be kind of like a nonprofit business, for-profit business, a vendor, or there's going to be others. And when you're clicking between these, like you can attach a person from membership, you can attach a nonprofit household from membership, a for-profit household from membership, a vendor from finance, and then other is just going to be another one that you create. So we're going to say household, and we're going to link this to Sally Baxter's household here. So then at that point, we'll say save. It'll tie those two together. So now that we've created her account, Next, we'll go in and she's going to purchase something. And since this is set up like a school, we can either go to payments, we can either go to transactions by going to the transactions grid, or if we're under AR accounts, we can just click the transactions tab here for the Baxter household. So Baxter household transactions. So from there, we'll add in a transaction. So this window is a little smaller and more, I guess, compact. So I usually use this window, but it can be done from the other window. Transactions will say new. So with the Baxter household, we can add in a transaction. So inside of here, AR transaction, we can select the transactions that we've created to get this set up. Let me click cancel here just 1 second. And cancel. No. Canceling. Yes. So we do want to cancel. So when it comes to transactions, to be able to do a transaction, you have to have items that you've entered into the system. So the items that we're seeing that people can purchase come from this items, charges, and fees. So this system comes completely blank. That allows you to set up your daycare or your school within the system and have people purchase those items. So we've got student ID fees, student registration. There's this option where you can enter in a table, and the table allows you as the person who's setting it up to give people breaks for having multiple students or multiple children in the system. So for one child, you're paying $28.50 if that child's a member, or for 2 children, you're paying $26.50 per child, or for 3 children, you're spending $24.50 per child. So it gives you the option to give them a tax, or not a tax break, but just a break for multiple students. Or it could be multiple days. So it could be Monday through Friday is a certain amount, then Monday, Wednesday, Friday is a certain amount, then 1 day is a certain amount, then 3 days is a certain amount. So you can set them up as, different prices for different items, and you can kind of cross-reference and build a table of the information you'd like to see. So I'm going to add in lab fees. So I'm going to stick with the format we have here. So we're going to say lab fees, so LF-001. Then the description is going to be lab fees. And you'll have the choice of rate table, manual, no price, and normal. So let's say lab fees are $99.99. They can be taxable, and you can mark it as an active. So we're just going to say save. These are lab fees. I guess they're not taxable in this case, and then save. So then from there, what we'll do is we'll go back and go to our AR account, and we'll select the Baxters, and we'll say new transaction. So at that point in time, we can add in all of the things that Sally is going to buy. And it can be tied to a child. So Sally's daughter is Allison, and we'll click select. Then from there, we can go to find, and we can add in the items that we need to add in. So we're going to say use rate table select. And we're going to say that she's a member child, and then that's going to be $28.50, quantity of 1, we're only buying 1. Then we'll click save, then that'll add in that transaction. Then I'm also going to add in the lab fees as well, since I took time to add that in. Only buying 1, terms, point of sale. You can, and actually let me save this. You can, like when you're saying point of sale, you're basically saying the whole amount is due at one time. And with nearly $3,000, I guess, there's some people who could pay all that at one point in time, but you may want monthly payments. You could say 9 months worth of payments. So monthly payments or bi-weekly payments or bi-monthly payments. Then you can state the amounts, and then you can save it. So $28.50. And then to be paid at a certain point in time. So we created these on the day, which is probably a little weird for students to be agreeing to payments in the middle of June, but you would set it up probably at the start of the year, August or September. Then when it comes time to send out a report, so we've got our transactions in here, we can go to print, and then we can state whether or not we want transactions and payments or account statements. And this is really an account statement situation. So account statements, we can say statement, we could say all accounts or one account. So we know we have the Baxters here. And then you could say unpaid balance, either an unpaid or zero balance, activity within the past 3 months, no payment since. So we're going to say any unpaid balance, then preview. Then at this point, this is their statement. So they have these 2 items. This is the balance. This is the minimum due. And then they have to pay every 30 days, basically. So this is going to be this amount divided by 9, but they, with the $99 added on at that point. So at that point, the bottom could be tore off, mailed back with a check, or if your church has an online payment system, they could pay online to pay it. But at that point, you'd print it out and then you'd mail them off. So once that's done, they sent you a payment, then you can go in here and you can click on the item that you want to pay. So let's select this one and click pay. Then at that point in time, you can state payment date. So say they paid today, payment by, and it could be any of these items here. It could even be money on account or an award or gift. So let's say they paid by check. Document number 1, 2, 3, 4. But then total payment. So say they paid the, I'm going to say $450. And then they're going to apply the total $450 to it at that point in time. So then you would just save. And then you'll notice how before it was $2,850, now it's down to $2,400. So you just add in payments, and those payments will actually show up on the payment tab. You'll just walk through entering in each one of the payments. So then there's 2 other options for people to pay. There's money on account and awards. So awards are basically going to be like, hey, somebody received a scholarship. So like we have the church education donation. So say we add in one, whoops, awards, add. Oh, actually the add is over here on the right. So awards, oh, that is correct. Add award account. Okay, I'm sorry about that. This box here at the top was kind of throwing me off. So with this award, you can add an award and you can link it to a household or a person. So we can attach this to the Baxter household. Then you click save. Then it will add that award in the system. Then you can attach the award. You can add in the award at that point. So, so name of this, I'm just going to call mine Scholarship Fund. Then that's going to be an award. And actually, we can switch it to scholarship. And then say it was $500. Then save. So once we've added that award here, so from there, we'll go back to their AR account. And AR account will go to the Baxter household. Then let me close this and reopen it. AR accounts, Baxter household, awards. assign the amount $500, then save it. And then it will attach that award to Allison at that point in time. So it was already inside the household, but now we're attaching it to the person. Once the award is attached to the person, then you can go to transactions, and you can, then you can go to payments, and you can make a payment on one of your transactions. So usually I go to transaction, click on the transaction, then go to payment. Then you can select award from there. And we have $500. And then at that point, you can put $500 on the total amount, or you can do a partial amount, partially apply the award, and partially apply award or gift. There it goes. Okay, so with the applied, you can type in the amount that you want to apply, $250. Then that will adjust it. Can I type in here? No, you have to type in the applied line. $250. Then at that point, you can save it, and it will take $250 out of that award and apply it to their transaction. So there are quite a few moving parts with this. When it comes to awards, the payments are a little bit more straightforward, but with the awards, you have to create the award, attach it to the household, and attach it to the child at that point in time. If it's going to be for a student, then you can attach it to the transaction as a form of a payment. So, and then see the $250. Money on account is the other item there. So with money on an account, if you had money that went from one school year to the next school year, and it was literally left on the account, you can go through the same process. So you can go in here, add money to the account. Excuse me, sorry about that. Excuse me. And then you can add money to the account, $500. And say this is just left over from last semester. Then save. Then that would be money on the account. Then if you went to the transaction to make a payment, let's say we're going to pay these lab fees this time. Pay. Then how do you want to pay? You can say money on account from the $500, partial amount, applied $99, then save. And the balance is now 0 on that item. So sorry for the confusion there. Okay, so that's accounts receivable. So let me close that. And I guess the last thing would be you could print, and then you could print out an account activity report, or it could be transactions and payments. This transactions and payments really is more of an internal report though, because you're looking at what took place inside the church for your benefit, not that you're printing out a statement for the parents or the students or anything like that. Okay, so I'm gonna close the preview, and we're gonna switch back over to our PowerPoint, and let's go through our quiz. There we go. Question number 1, what is a vendor? So I'm gonna launch the poll. There we go. Everybody should be able to see the question. So it's going to be A, type of account, B, any person, company, or organization that receives a payment from the congregation, or C, a way of grouping accounts together. A, B, or C. Okay, and let me close the poll and share the results. And we were unanimous. 100% of the people said B. So I'll hide the results and share the answer. And you guys were correct. A vendor is a company, person, or organization who receives a payment. This could also include employees. Every check entered in finance must be associated with the vendor, and you can also choose to associate journal entries with a vendor for electronic payments. Okay, question number 2. This one's going to be multiple choice as well. What should the status be for checks you want to print? A, paid, B, pending, C, hold. A, B, or C? Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll and share the results. 100% of the people said pending. Perfect. So I'm going to hide the poll and share the results. And you are correct. In order for a check to print, it needs to have a pending status. If you are planning to print a check, leave the check number and date field blank. Once the checks are printed, they will be changed to a paid status. And also printing the check assigns the check numbers as well. Multiple choice. Launch. Okay, what is the proper way to handle a check from a previous or prior fiscal year that was not cashed? A, void the check. B, stop payment on the check. C, clear the check using the bank account reconciliation utility. A, B, or C? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So we were unanimous once again. 100% of the people said B, stop payment on the check. So I'm gonna hide the results and share the answer. You guys are correct. The answer is B. In this situation, a check should be stopped. This makes a reverse in journal entry in the current year to return the funds to your bank account. The program will not allow you to void a check from a previous or prior year, since this would cause that year's balance, the prior year's balance, to be incorrect. Good job, everyone. Question number 4, true or false? When creating a journal entry, applying a credit to a bank account will decrease the account balance. True or false? This one's a little tricky. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So we said false. So I'm going to hide the poll and share the answer. And this answer is true. This one is a little tricky. A credit to an asset account will actually decrease the account balance, while a debit will increase the account balance. And I think this was one of the tougher ones for me to grasp early on. Credit is actually a decrease and debit is an increase. I don't know, I guess it's been that way for 500 years now, but it always seemed to reverse in my head. But the more I learn, the more I kind of grasp, hey, that's just the way that it is. Okay, last question, fifth and final quiz question, true or false? Transactions can be entered for a future finance year, and I actually didn't talk about this one. But we're going to go ahead and give it a whirl, see how it goes, and I'll talk more about it after we answer the question. So transactions can be entered for a future finance year before the year-end utility in finance is run. True or false? This is kind of a tough one here, but okay. Oh, okay, good. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So the results are true. So 100% of the people said true. Then I'm going to hide the results and share the answer. Okay, and the answer is true. You can enter transactions for the current year and any year in the future, which seems a little weird, but the only thing you can't do is enter transactions for previously closed fiscal years. So those of you that have been using the software for a while, you probably at some point in time have had to enter transactions for January, like payroll, prior to closing out the prior year, you know, December and everything else. So it does give you the opportunity to do that. And once you close the year, you know, everything's date and time stamped, so everything ends up balancing out correctly. But that is an option if needed. Okay, perfect. Do you have any questions? We'd love to hear from you. You can post questions in the question box and I'll answer them. I do want to, people begin to drop off pretty quickly. So I do want to thank everybody for attending today's Shepherd Staff webinar. We truly hope you enjoyed today's session. And you know, you can leave any questions you want. You can give us a call at 1-800-346-6120, and you can send an email to support@cts.cph.org. Okay. Well, if there aren't any questions, I truly appreciate you guys joining me today for today's session. And I hope everybody has a blessed evening. For Dan Ray, this is Rod Kyles. We are signing off. Thanks, everyone.